Well, howdy there, folks. Welcome back, all my Advanced Squad Leader friends out there. This is your host, ID Jester, and we're going to look at the Advanced Squad Leader system in about 15 minutes. Got a brand new episode here for you. Look at me go. It's been a while since we posted some videos, but this is our second one today. And yes, I'm going to concentrate on not getting burned out and trying to overdo this time so we're not having a big layoff. But I decided to try and get another video out right away for you guys, because I know you've been waiting and watching to see what happens. So, yep, we're definitely going to be looking at this again. As promised from last episode, hopefully you got a chance to check it out, we are going to be looking at defensive first fire, and specifically we're going to be looking at 8.2 of the rulebook, Section A, Residual Firepower. There's quite a lot of rules actually associated with this, although there's just a few very, very important things you need to know. 8.2 says residual firepower is when a unit is attacked by defensive first fire, subsequent first fire, or final protective fire. You should know what these are if you watched the last few episodes. The target location in which the attack is resolved, even if in bypass, is marked with the residual firepower counter equal to half of the highest IFT firepower column used for that attack. Thereafter, any unit entering or expending movement factors or movement points in the same location in the same movement phase is attacked on the IFT table with the firepower represented by the residual firepower counter. A new IFT die roll and any applicable FFMO, FFNAM die roll modifier. A unit expending movement factors or movement points to leave a location is not subject to residual firepower attack in the location it is leaving. Remove all residual firepower counters at the end of the movement phase. I'm going to kind of gloss over these so we can get right in and show you what all of these represent and what they're talking about here in our Vassal module. So I'm going to kind of go over these really quickly because I'm trying to get these done in about 15 minutes. There are some restrictions, of course. 8.22. Let's go back up to 8.21. Didn't realize I missed that one. No more than one residual firepower counter can be placed in a location. Although a fire lane residual firepower is not a residual firepower counter and therefore can exist in hex with other fire lane counters or residual firepower counters. We are not going to be looking at fire lanes in this episode. For those of you who know what they are, just be patient. That'll come in next episode. We're just talking about residual firepower counters in this episode only. So no more than one residual firepower counter can be placed in a location. However, a larger residual firepower counter can subsequently replace a smaller residual firepower counter. Residual firepower can attack even units using bypass. So even units in bypass. Again, restrictions 8.22. Residual firepower can never form a fire group. It always attacks alone. Residual firepower is always the first defensive fire attack allowed against a moving unit in the current location during the movement phase. Unit can be attacked by residual firepower only once per location. Movement factor or movement point expenditure simultaneously. For example, if you spend 2 movement factors to enter a building or 2 movement factors to cross a wall and enter open ground, do not cause multiple residual firepower attacks. Expending movement factors or movement points as separate activities, such as entering a hex and then later on deciding to place smoke grenades, is not considered simultaneous expenditure, so then that would cause the residual firepower to attack again. Residual firepower does not attack until all activity of the movement factor or movement point expenditure is completed. So if you're throwing grenade or smoke grenades, doing support weapon recovery, searching, firing smoke dispensers, You resolve that first before the residual firepower attacks. And then, of course, down here at the bottom, any attack versus a pillbox never leaves residual firepower in the pillbox location, nor in the pillbox location of that hex, unless the attack could affect the entire hex, such as spray fire or area target type. So let's look at our Vassal module here. I've reset the board back from last episode here because normally when we're thinking about residual firepower, basically what does that represent? Well, each turn, each round of ASL represents several minutes of time. So when these fellas move into this hex, and we have a defensive fire attack from these units in M4 into that hex, we're assuming that these units are firing into that hex and watching that hex during the full time that these units are moving. So it doesn't really make sense that these units move into this hex and then move away. If another unit ends up moving into the hex, do these guys just ignore him? They never saw him? What? We don't understand. Why aren't these guys able to shoot at them and do any kind of damage to them? Well, that's what residual firepower represents. And basically what you're going to be doing is once you fire into a hex, you're going to leave a residual firepower counter, and this is what they look like. I'll bring a couple out here to show you what they look like. And this is what they look like, and you're basically going to be putting those in that hex, or in that location, I guess I should say is even better, because you're going to be firing at a specific location in case you're talking about buildings that have multiple levels, or just lots of different things that might have different locations inside a hex. So when I mean hex, I mean you're firing at a specific location. In this case, we're firing at K3. So once this unit ends up leaving the hex, let's say it moves up here to L2, the residual fire counter will be left behind in that hex, and subsequently any other unit that decides to move into that hex during the same movement phase is going to be attacked by whatever firepower is left behind from your units that did the attack. So let's give you just a quick overview, show you how this works here. So it is the German player's movement phase. I know I haven't said that recently, but there we go. And so the Russian player is going to be using defensive fire to kind of prevent and try to hinder and hurt his opponent's units during their movement phase. So if this unit does decide to move into this hex, at that point the units here in M4 could choose to defensive first fire. If they choose to do that, they're going to do an attack that's going to have 10 firepower. Let's assume both squads there, both full squads decide to shoot at the same hex there, and they have 10 firepower, and they're going to get -1 for FFNAM, FFMO, move in the open, and non-assault move. And so he's going to have a 10 -2 to his dice roll attack against this unit, which we've talked about with the how to attack and all that. But what's going to be done afterwards is we're going to look at our little chart here. So if we got a 10 attack, we know that a 10 attack, there is no 10 column, so it goes down to the 8 column. Now if you remember from our rules here, it's going to be equal to half of the highest IFT firepower column used for that attack. So half of 8 is going to be 4 that you're going to be leaving behind for firepower, that you're going to be leaving behind. If the attack ended up being on, let's say, the 12 column, if we use some different units, half of 12 is 6. There is a 6 column, so we're going to leave 6 residual down. In fact, if you look at the firepower tables, 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, 20, you will notice that when you look at your counters for residual firepowers, they actually go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 to 12. And that's as high as you can go, actually, is the 12 column. So these counters match your IFT table that you're going to resolve on half of the firepower. So if we use our example here, these two units in M4, they're going to be using the 8 firepower table to do an attack, and then they're going to leave 4 residual behind in that hex. So let's assume they do the attack, and they roll really horribly and nothing happens, and the German player gets to move his units. Well, he's going to get to move his units out there. These 2 units, of course, are going to be marked with the first fire counter. And hopefully everybody's watched the last few videos, so you know what I'm talking about, because I'm trying to gloss over the rules that we've already talked about and kind of concentrating on the rules that we're really trying to focus on in this episode. It's programmed learning here, so we're trying to focus on just the rule that we're looking at. So they get a first fire counter, and the German player continues his move, and then when he moves into this hex, this unit could declare a defensive first fire attack. When he does that, he's going to do 6 firepower attack. It's going to be a -2 because of the fire FFMO move in the open, FFNAM for non-assault move. So it'll be a 6 -2 attack. But let's look at the firepower that he's going to leave behind, the residual firepower. So he did a 6 attack, so it's going to be on a 6 column. Half of 6 is 3. There is no 3, so you're going to leave 2 residual firepower behind. So we would get out a 2. We'd place it there. We resolve all the attacks. So let's just assume again, for whatever reason, nothing happens in the attack. So we have left 2 firepower results here and 4 firepower results there. Now, even let's assume something was to happen later on, and one of these German units, let's say this one here in I2, decides to move. He spends 2 movement factors to move into this hex. He spends 1 movement factor to move in this hex. The moment he does that, the first thing that's going to happen is he is then going to be attacked by the residual firepower, and you're going to roll 2 dice, obviously, and you're going to resolve any attack that results from his residual firepower that was left behind. Before you can even decide whether or not you want to subsequent first fire or anything like that, final protective fire, you're going to resolve the firepower left behind from your residual firepower. So you can see this is quite a great and strategic, important thing that the defensive player has to its capabilities for his units. You can see that, let me just move this guy back here. Before I decide that it's the German player to move, I'm not going to be wanting to run through these locations that have all these residual firepower attacks, because basically your opponent's getting free attacks against you. You can see if he rolls anything from a 7 or less, we're going to have a result on the 4 table. So moving units into that location, obviously you're risking having something happen to them just by having the residual firepower there. So as a defensive player, you want to use your attacks into strategic locations so that you can kind of force your opponent to either A, have to bypass the location you fired into, which will cause him to spend more movement factors to go around it or to avoid going into that hex, or B, making him move into that hex and basically getting a free attack out of it. And as you can see, even with the low value of a 4 firepower, getting a free attack, which might cause them to become pinned or having to do morale checks or anything like that. So as a defensive player, you're using your attacks to kind of limit where your opponent might end up going. And you can see that if I've got 2 residual firepowers here from this unit moving up and moving around, and unfortunately we weren't able to do any damage to it, but now all of these units in K1 and I2, H2, H3, J4, K4, all of these units up here in this corner, this whole section now, have to think about where they have to go. Where are they going to maneuver to? Where are they going to be able to get to where they were originally, the German player was originally going to send them? If the German player was originally going to send this guy from I2 up here into maybe M3, maybe he's going to try and move it up here into M3, now all of a sudden he's got to go through one or possibly two free attacks against him. So now all of a sudden maybe he's thinking, well, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to have to go this way. And now I can't reach M3. Maybe I have to move up here into, L0, or maybe I have to come across up here to the north, and I don't really want to come across the north. Maybe I'm going to have to come all the way down here to the south. Well, now I can't reach M3 all of a sudden. Now I'm going to only be able to reach into K4. So you start moving this guy around, then maybe there's another German unit that attacks it and leaves some residual firepower here. And in this situation, we don't have any, but let's just assume that maybe let's just assume that I don't know. Give me another unit here. Give me a unit, thank you. No, that's not a very good unit. Give me another one. Well. Well, I don't see one that's really going to help me explain my example, but as this guy moves forward, if we had another Russian squad that was to leave some residual firepower here, all of a sudden these two units in H2 and H3 have to worry about, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to enter this hex. I might have to go this way. I might have to go this way. Well, forcing your unit to go, instead of coming into this hex, if we force the unit to come here, well, maybe we get line of sight now from somebody else. So that gives us great advantage as the defending player to kind of force the attacker into maybe altering his strategy. And as I explained many episodes ago, the more you cause your opponent to think, the more you cause your opponent to make decisions, the more times you will cause him to make a bad decision. And forcing your opponent to make bad decisions gives you an advantage. So by using defensive fire, by using residual firepower, you're now causing your opponent to have to rethink the situation about where he's going to be moving units. Is he going to be moving through residual firepower? Is he going to alter his path? Do I go this way? Do I go to the north? Do I go to the south? Do I go through the residual firepower? The more choices you force him to make, the more times he'll make bad choices. Oh, you know what? I'm just going to go through the residual firepower. Then I was like, okay, great. Let's see what I do. Bam, 6. 6 minus 2 because you're moving in the open. You're not a assault move. That's going to be a 4 on the 4 table. Okay, let's see what happened to you. 4 up. Hey, do a 1 morale check. There you go. There's your reward. Oh, no. Shoot, I made a bad decision. Well, defensive player, good job, because now you've made your opponent have to make a decision. He made a bad decision, and it's cost him. Hopefully it's cost him. Now he might be able to make his morale check. Let's see what he does here. He makes a 6 plus 1 is 7. So he did make his morale check. So it didn't end up costing him, but it might have seriously hampered what had happened to this unit. If he wouldn't have made such a low roll on his morale check, he could have become pinned. He could have become broken. All of a sudden he's out of unit because he forced him into a spot with residual firepower. So that is, as the defensive player, your whole goal in the defensive fire phase. And I hated to use this as the last example for the episode for defensive fire, because it's one of the most important things is residual firepower. You have the opportunity to kind of cause difficulties and problems for your opponent during his movement phase, to make him alter his plans, to make him have to take attacks that can cause him damage, to cause him become broken, or like I said, even making him make decisions, and the more decisions he has to make, the more times he's going to make a bad decision. And that's what you're trying to do as a defensive player is force your opponent into making decisions and making bad decisions, and hopefully giving yourself an opportunity. As the defensive player, you don't get many opportunities to do anything, and now all of a sudden you can see with your attacks you can cause damage. That the attack we did against these units might have done something, but that's not what I'm focusing in on right now. We're just focusing in on the residual firepower and the strategies behind it and what it can lead to. In our example here, we didn't end up doing any damage, but fortunately for us, we ended up having a whole section of the map that all of a sudden now your opponent has to deal with. And he's going to either have to alter his plans, or he's going to have to risk moving units into situations that he didn't want to. You're going to have dice rolls. The more your opponent hope, well, I think I can move into here because I can roll low. Well, he keeps thinking that. Sooner or later he's going to fail, and that'll be nothing but good news for you as a defensive player. As the attacking player, and you're looking at this situation, these are things you have to think about. Is when your opponent is going to be attacking you, he's going to be leaving residual firepower behind. So where can I go? Now let's look at the strategy as the German player here for a second. Where can I go that he's, I'm not going to want to go into that space later on with other units. Where can I get into a situation where I don't have to worry about where the residual firepower is? Now, if I move this guy up into this hex, I'm thinking, okay, I want to get to this hex in M2, but maybe it's better for me to go into this hex. He's probably not going to want to fire into that hex because of the building, and I believe there's a building. Let me just double check. Yeah, there's a building in that. So he probably is not going to fire into that hex. And if he does fire into that hex, I'm probably okay with that because I'm not going to be damaged. And then I can end up moving into this hex. Now, if he shoots at me and leaves residual firepower, that's okay. It's not the end of the world because I can now move my units up, into J2, K3, L2, and I don't have to worry about running through residual firepower spaces to get there. So, as the attacking player, you have to understand what the defensive player can do with his residual firepower and how strong it is, and use your units to cause him to use his attacks in positions where you're not going to be wanting to move a bunch of units into. If I'm trying to get a bunch of units into M2 so now I can assault move into N2, I don't want to have a bunch of residual firepower in L1 and L2 because that's the only way I want to be able to make it in there. And so I'm going to have to think about how do I get my opponent to use his attacks into locations that maybe I don't need. If I move into this hex here, okay, all of a sudden he wants to leave residual firepower in L3, and if I move these guys up into this hex and maybe this hex, then maybe he's wasting his attack, his residual firepower down in here, which then leaves me opportunity to move all these guys across the board into M2, which is what I really wanted to do to begin with. So again, ASL it's an ebb and flow of trying to figure out the best way to use your units to the best of their capabilities. And the more times you can put the pressure on your opponent to make decisions, to have to think about the best thing to do, the more times he's not going to be able to make the good choice or be able to make the low roll all the time to save his units when he needs to. And residual firepower is one of the best ways as a defensive player to keep your opponent from moving into spots that you don't want him to move to. So hopefully this is a good cover of the rules associated with residual firepower and kind of breaking down some of the strategies, some of the information that's associated with the rules. Now, one thing we didn't look at, and we're going to talk about next time, is fire lanes. When we talk about residual firepower and fire lanes, we're talking about using your support weapon, machine guns, to actually create lanes of attack. And we're going to look at the rule next time, but basically as an overview, if this guy moves into this hex, the heavy machine gun can then attack it with defensive fire and basically leave a whole line of residual firepower that if anybody crosses into those hexes will be attacked with. So you can see that with the machine guns you can even take this residual firepower to the next degree with actual covering multiple hexes at the same time with your residual firepower. And obviously for the Russian player, having a machine gun create a fire lane down this road right here will cause the German player, anytime he moves into that hex, into that one, into this one, into this one, to take basically a free attack against him. And you can see how powerful that is. But we're going to look at that next episode when we're talking about the advanced squad leader system in about 15 minutes. So thanks all my advanced squad leader friends out there. Be sure to leave your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions below. And we'll see you next time when we talk about machine gun fire lanes during the defensive fire phase. So see you next time. Thanks for watching, folks.